Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. Newspapers.com makes it easy to find your family's story with more than 500 million digitized newspaper pages from the 1690s to today. Search for obituaries, marriage and birth announcements, photos, and more in papers from across the U.S., the UK, Canada, and beyond, stretching back 3 centuries. For listeners of this podcast, newspapers.com is offering 20% off a Publisher Extra subscription. Just use the code Genealogy Adventure at checkout. That code is Genealogy Adventure for 20% off Publisher Extra.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Tanya Williams. Hello, everybody. And we have our Food Griot, Tanya, with us again today.
Yes, we
How
do.
are you guys? Yes.
And
hi, guys.
Hi. And we promise we had no idea when we put this show in the calendar that today was actually National Ice Cream Day.
You're kidding.
So that was absolutely unplanned. Nor did we expect that the entire nation was going to be having like a heat wave this week.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Absolute heat wave. My hair is a barometer. I'm doing my fro today. Probably doing my fro because my hair decided that's what it's doing in this humidity.
So hello, Tanya. Before we get to you, Donnie's going to do your introduction so our audience members who aren't familiar with you can get a little flavor, no pun intended, of who you are.
All the pun intended. All the pun intended.
Just do all the puns.
Right.
Shall we?
Yes. Yes. So here we are, guys, with Tanya Hopkins, aka the Food Griot. She is a culinary historian, a nonfiction storyteller, how do you pronounce that word?
Oh, I think cognoscente. That's just like the Italian version of connoisseur. You can say connoisseur, but it's like
connoisseur. All right. Yeah. Well, and creator, host of the Food Griot show, sharing savory and sometimes sweet true stories behind the makings of America's cuisines and culinary scenes. She helped co-found the nonprofit James Hemings Society with Chef Ashbel McElveen to uphold timeless Black culinary creativity that greatly influenced the development of American fine dining. Tanya's an active advisor on the Museum of Food and Drink exhibition, African Americans Making the Nation's Table. She served as foremost food historian for best-selling celebrity chef cookbook Carla Howell's Soul Food, Everyday and Celebration, and for Harlem Hops, the nation's first 100% Black-owned beer bar restaurant. Tanya was the first and only food historian showcased on the long-running iconic ABC Daily show, The Chew. She teaches wine education at a Black woman-owned boutique wine shop in Brooklyn called Good Wine, serves as lead culinary history advisor for the Old Stone House of Brooklyn, and works with many museums and cultural organizations throughout the region. So thank you and welcome, Tanya.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you, guys.
To say that you are a busy lady is an understatement.
Busy. And that version of the bio, because when we first met a couple of months ago, has updates. So I'm like, I got to send y'all a new bio that talks about the Savory and Sweet show on maybe you mentioned it on WURD, Progressive Black Talk Media.
I just didn't say WURD, but I did mean to say the state. Yeah, I didn't say that part. So you gotta definitely listen in to her. I've listened in, and it's been awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
So we all hope that you guys have your ice cream to the ready, because I believe Donya did tweet that out, maybe even Facebooked it.
I tweeted it, I Facebooked it, and I'm eating it.
Because the
I got ice cream
one,
props.
oh, we like, because I have to say in the introduction, the one African American connection to ice cream that I was familiar with was Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's son James, who went to Paris with his sister. Sorry, not his mother. His Sally Hemings' brother.
Her brother.
Her brother.
Sally's
Yeah.
older brother. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Her brother. Sorry, it sounded wrong when I said it, and I was like,
I
"No,
was
that's
like,
not right." So
I'm gonna tell him. Mm-hmm.
so not Thomas Jefferson's son, kind of his brother-in-law.
His brother-in-law.
If you want to think about it that way. Anyway,
yeah.
Thomas, Sally, and James went to Paris. For most of you who probably know a little bit about Thomas Jefferson's history, where James trained as a French chef. And one of the things that he brought back, which is something that I've loved in France, was frozen custard. And that was the only connection I ever knew that African Americans had.
When did you first know that? How did you? Because most people don't even know that story.
Well, because I have a connection to Thomas and Sally. There was a story told in my family. Mm-hmm. So every time they trot out, that kind of French vanilla ice cream, they're like, yeah, our ancestor has something to do with this.
No, it was his recipe. It's the oldest recipe on record in America in the what's the Library of Congress, but it's attributed to Thomas Jefferson when actually it was James who did. It's a lot of work to arrive at a working ice cream recipe. So it was James who trained and worked and trial and error like anything. Mm-hmm. And ice cream is part science and part art. So he was in France for 5 years learning the culinary arts, and they were at the top of the game at the time. They had some stuff had come in from Italy and then France, but then America, people were drinking milkshakes was the closest that they were getting to ice cream at the time in the 1700s. But James Hemings cracks the code and comes up with several ice cream recipes, and the one that Jefferson penned and takes credit for is through James's telling. It's James's way at arriving at a way that makes sense, where you get the best result each time. And
so can I just cycle back to that for a hot second? So as if Thomas Jefferson could even work his way around the kitchen. So he wasn't mistranscribed as being kind of the father of ice cream. He claimed.
I mean, it's crazy. I even went to the ice cream calendar today, or yesterday, to just kind of be like, what are they saying? I'm just curious what they're saying. And they literally are talking about it as if Jefferson was in a kitchen or anywhere, milking a cow, doing whatever, doing the things. And it's like, no, and there's no mention of James. I'm like, this is why I do the work I do. This is why me and my colleagues do the work that we do. Because it's like, how is it in 2022 that they're lies of omission, basically, right? And this person who was America's first classically trained chef de cuisine, who was owned by the person who authored the Declaration of Independence. Okay. And James Hemings lived through, I guess Jefferson did too, lived through the American Revolution and the French Revolution, because it breaks out while he's there training and shopping right. It's like, it's just this whole Black stories and significant contributions. He just doesn't get acknowledged. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. But I was like, wow, people are still trying to say Jefferson. This is Jefferson's ice cream recipe, as if. But I guess in the terms of legal ownership, technically it was.
It is.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't be surprised. So much of our history has been co-opted like that. But am I right in thinking? Because I'm thinking, we just think about ice cream as being a very easy dish to make. You can go into your cupboards and get the eggs and the milk and the cream and the whatnot. Just, in terms of its ingredients, it's an art, but the ingredients themselves, you can go to your supermarket, get the ingredients, and make your own ice cream. But thinking back in the day, we're talking the 1700s. Am I right in thinking, because it did require a lot of eggs and it required cream, and if you wanted to have flavorings like vanilla, if you were poor and working class, you just couldn't go out to the market. It was an expensive dish to make. Oh, and the sugar.
No, it
Let's
didn't
not forget
exist.
sugar.
Right, it didn't exist really until, I mean, even anybody who had any of those ingredients that were at the time making something that would have been more like a milkshake were wealthy people who owning a cow was a sign of wealth, right? To be able to even have access to the cream or the milk. Sugar was expensive until it wasn't, until the price came down over the centuries of the transatlantic slave trade, because that was the main reason of the, the engine of the slave trade. Ice. Let's just start there. Like there were no freezers. There were no, like, people weren't able. You had to, like, having access to an ice house or having an ice house. You had to be very wealthy to have your own ice house. That was a whole thing, and to be able to afford it and to use it in the culinary. And so in ancient human history, these things happen with royalty, in places where there are servants and slaves, like Rome and ancient Mesopotamia, Persia, wherever. But when you come here, it's like, well, of course, in America, that means, it's no surprise that people like George Washington and Thomas, I was going to call him George Jefferson, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. I was going to combine the two. It's no wonder George Jefferson was a big ice cream fan, because he was owning humans. No, he wasn't. George Washington was. Thomas Jefferson were. But that was wealth. That was wealth. Land ownership, human ownership, and affordability of the ingredients and the work to do it. You're right, Brian. There are some simpler. I'm not gonna pretend to be an ice cream making expert. I'm an ice cream history making, not making it up, but like, finding the information, the storytelling expert. But there's many different ways to do it. But most of the ways that we have come to appreciate before machinery involve a lot of elbow grease. I'll just say a lot of just a lot of steps, and a lot of timing, and some science and some art at the same time. What flavor were you eating, Tanya?
Oh, what flavor am I eating? I am eating.
Just rub it in. That we can't have none of your ice cream virtually.
I told y'all ahead of time what to do. So, but I'm eating cookies and cream.
Is that cookies and cream? Brian, where's your ice cream?
Yeah, I didn't have time to go out yesterday and get some.
Y'all hard-headed.
I'm with you guys in spirit. So
I had some, but I had a house guest who ate all my ice cream. I'm not gonna mention any names. So now
see, y'all hard-headed.
So we go from frozen custard, which is kind of sort of like ice cream, but not exactly the same. So how did James go from frozen custard to what we would recognize as ice cream?
That's a really good question, because it really is a custard base that he's doing. He's using the classic French style, as far as is my understanding, which involves lots of egg yolks and cream and sugar. There's an agitation involved. There's a churning. That's what leads to this whole thing about churning, not just churning butter, but churning ice cream also. There's a thing about churning dairy, cream in particular, where you get a smoother texture. Also in this process at that time, it's not clear. It seems like the use of salt, the scientific use of salt in terms of lowering the temperature of the ice cream, and also when in the 1800s, Augustus Jackson uses some of it to enhance the flavor, in addition to the sugar, just like a pinch of salt, the way you would do in baking or any kind of cookery. James might have had some salt involved. You know what? That recipe is published, and I was just looking at it at some crazy hour. I was just looking at it, and so I can tell you if his has salt in it or not. But yeah, so it's basically, it would be a texture thing. It would be an agitation and a texture thing. So more stirring, or vigorous stirring, or churning, or cranking involved if you're using a device, or a handheld device, or it's or not, and it's going to be denser and less smooth and less creamy if it's just a frozen custard, versus like ice cream, which kind of gets into a cloud-like state.
God, you have me thinking about Haagen-Dazs now, and Ben and Jerry's. Did James Hemings have to invent like any implements or tools or a process in terms of how to do it?
Oh, he absolutely was always being what's the I'm going to say ingenuitive. I don't think that's a word. Um, Ingenuity was always a part of. I mean, he's also, little side note, he's behind the potage stove that we all, which is the earlier precursor to the stove that we have in our most of us have in our kitchens today, because at the time that he is cooking in colonial America, everything's happening with a hearth and hearth, open fire, different coals, burning wood. Iron pots, rods, things on different hooks and but when some of the techniques that he learns in France, which involve making cream sauces, because there are recipes, ice cream recipes that start hot, where you're on the stove and then you transfer it to a mold and then um, but in order to do all those kinds of things, you need a different cooking apparatus. So he actually comes up with early versions of the American stove range that we now use versus cooking this way versus everything going this way. So,
So wait a minute. You gotta cook ice cream first before you really?
most
I'm
of it,
like,
yeah,
I didn't.
most of it. There's you're cooking, you're stirring cream and the vanilla and the sugar. It's all you're blending and stirring, and then there's a cool down, and then there's a freezing. And I need to start making ice cream. And all these modern ice cream entrepreneurs I've been talking with, I'm gonna have to go hang out with them because everything I know about making ice cream, I have learned in books and on paper. And when I was little, I did. My best friend Carol Davis, who was on the show, her family was from the deep south, and they had ice cream making traditions. My family did not have an ice cream making tradition, but hers did, and I was always at her house. And so I did help her dad make ice cream. Her mom and dad made ice cream a couple of summers, but I can't remember the details. But I need to get more into it because there's not just one way. There's different, and then now with machinery and stuff, there's different devices. That there's some new thing that a friend of mine got. She's like, you got to get one of these, and I forget what it was called, but there's no one way. But um but if you but if you look at everything, there are some patterns, you know
Because
the
I
simpler.
remember making it a handful of times with my great aunt in Virginia, really, really rural Virginia, out in Charles City County. And she kind of had I would only describe it as like a butter churner. So it was wooden, it was like a little barrel, it had the lid on it with I call it the plunger, and you would just sit there and you would plunge and you'd stir, and that's how they
Right,
made,
exactly.
that's how they had ice cream.
The early ones were wooden, and then I think by the time, fast forward to my childhood in the 70s, they were plastic because I don't remember anything wood, like a sturdy plastic. uh he might have shown us the older wood one. I don't know. But yeah, so there's still a lot of mystery. So I got to plug back into the making side. Sorry guys, I was not, I don't have any firsthand experiences to share right this second.
I'm
But I
just
bet.
not a I'm not a dessert maker, so ice cream. I mean, I make desserts, don't get me wrong, but I do I cook. Like I'm a soul
Same,
food cooker.
same.
So yeah, this right here, this is I go and buy this at the store.
Right. People are like, it's
This is
Well,
delicious.
Tanya.
I
But
kind of
here's
like to think of ice cream making as like alchemy, because you just
that's
see
right.
this
Yeah.
liquid, and there's like in the back of my head, I'm like, there's no way that this liquid is going to turn into what I think of as ice cream, but it does.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
just
it
going to
does.
quickly
There's
cycle back to
a magic and a science to it. But I will just say this, Tanya, don't get too attached. I mean, that's great as a nice little treat in the store, but I would also encourage you to look out for artisan ice cream makers, old school ice cream makers. There are a lot of black um, craft, before it was a machine, before it was taken by the industrial system and put on conveyor belts, which is a lot of the ice cream we get today. Um, it's a night and day difference in terms of the,
Okay.
the
Okay.
quality. So treat yourself, yeah, what city are you in?
I'm in Maryland. I'm in Oxford.
Yeah, Maryland. There's some. Yep, I'll hook you up with the names of some. Because I'm amassing a list of all these black owned, not just black.
I love to eat.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's one in DC.
Oh, probably. Yeah. I mean, because here's the thing.
I'm sure it is.
And this is what I wanted to kind of explore with you guys is that because it's something that I stumbled upon in my research where I'm like, where are the ice cream dynasties and legacies? And we literally, the foundation of the American ice cream industry is the craft of artisan black confectioners and chefs and entrepreneurs who families, a lot of women and men too, who the first ice cream, the first scoop shops, the first parlors, because after emancipation it was a very specific trade and skill set to do. Like they were the ice cream makers on the plantations, and even free people had learned the craft because it was not easy to do. It was hard, and it took a lot of smart and brawn and brain, and they were in service to whether they were slaveholders or wealthy whites to create these delicacies. And so it became their businesses for after emancipation. A lot of early black wealth that I don't know what happened to it. I have theories. Come from ice cream making. It was catering.
So let me ask you this question then, because you're bringing in genealogy now. And when we're talking about genealogy and we're looking at occupations on census records and things of that nature, what would we look for on what is that occupation called? Is it called ice cream maker? I mean, was it called ice cream back then? Like, because I never even thought of it actually being an occupation. I mean, I never thought of that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And yes. And that's how I stumbled upon it. Now that you mention it, when I got my first real tangible clue that like, oh, there's something here. There's a story here. There's an untold American story here, was through, I guess, what would be considered not necessarily genealogical records, but records, registrations of like how residences and who lived where and what they did, and census data. I was staying in a small town upstate New York that I was doing this culinary history program, and for whatever reason, I can't remember now, but I knew that potato chips had been invented by a black chef in that area near Saratoga, upstate New York, and I also knew that there was something that had happened with ice cream. And I was going to the historical society and the library and the genealogy. I went all these places, and they were just like, yeah, we don't know. I was like, how do I look up earlier black families from these years, from this certain years in the 1700s, 1800s, what their occupations were or what they did? And they were like, oh, we don't have anything like that. Somebody overheard me in the pub talking about this with my colleagues, and the next morning they dropped off a book that had all of this data, all these records that went back at least 2 centuries for that town, and the names of houses and residences and businesses. And that's where I got my first indicate. And it said right there the race of the people and what they did, and that they had an ice cream parlor in their home.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, so now it's coming out. Now, the more I talk about this, more and more people are like, yeah, we made ice cream in our family all the time. So I'm curious how many black families ice cream traditions and recipes were maybe linked to an ice cream business at one point, whether, and most of them were small. They weren't, we think of them now as these huge, big companies, right? But once upon a time, it was very small, local artisan craft, like the ice cream maker in this neighborhood, in this town, and then the next town over, there was another one. And then, you know what I mean? So there were a lot.
Well, I also wonder if there's was some crossover business opportunities because a couple of episodes ago, Johnny, we had a guest on and we were talking about Black-owned beaches. So you're thinking, Black-owned beaches, they were very popular kind of summertime destinations for African Americans to go to. It would
Ice
stand to
cream.
reason that there probably would have been an ice cream vendor there.
Yeah, more than
Well,
likely.
right? Yeah, right, exactly. You're right, and that should not be hard to find on record, right? Or maybe, or I don't know. I mean, I have used genealogy as much as I would like to. I would like to talk with you guys about that, about partnering up on some projects, but that's another conversation.
Well, you haven't come to us with that yet.
Excuse me.
No.
So another name that I've seen associated with ice cream, not ice cream making, but around, I guess you would call the ice cream industry. And correct me if I'm wrong on this one, was a man called Alfred Cralle, Cralle. And he lived in Pittsburgh and he invented the ice cream scoop in 1897. There it is.
Not just any old ice cream scoop, but the one with the lever. My thing is blurred. That I don't know if you can see what's happening in here.
We saw it. I just saw it. Looked like an eye blinking. Yeah.
It's a little handheld machine. This is like a little gizmo. Like think about that era in the 1800s when that's the era of like machinery and machinations and patents and inventions and stuff. Yeah. He was born in 1866, a year after national emancipation. Yeah. And he's I love his story because he's an embodiment of all the hope and possibility. He's born in 1866, and what he does, the number of inventions and the number of patents and the solutions. It's about solving problems, right? He used to work in an ice cream parlor and he saw people getting tendonitis, trying to scoop this stuff out, and thought of there's got to be an easier way to get and faster. Now this is the beginning of this predates the conveyor belt that industry later use. These kinds of things then get built into actual mechanized things that have buttons that you press. This is still a manual machine. But yeah, he and that's the other thing. You have people think about slavery and the labor and the work, but it's also a lot of thinking and problem solving. The same way in that scene 12 Years a Slave, where he comes up with a easier way for them to transport the lumber or whatever, and the white overseer got mad because he looked stupid, whatever. I digress, but the point is he's a great example of that. But then what happens is the things like Tulsa massacre, all those types of things, the racial terrorism that starts to happen in the late 1800s and early 1900s kind of squashes a lot of that. And it's really sad because the whole nation benefits from these kinds of inventions and these kinds of solutions, these kinds of things, and these kinds of creativity. And he's a great example of what could have continued to happen. And it's happening again, but there's been so many stops and restarts for us in this country because of the negative impact, the negative power of racist policy and incidents that have had such devastating impact on setting back.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious if Mr. Cralle actually took a patent out on that, because he did. Did he earn money out of that?
What's that?
Did he earn money out of that? Because I certainly hope he did.
Yeah, see, this is the thing, and I need to get a grant to build on the research that I do know. My understanding is that there were a lot of ultimately the filing of the patent office figured out a way. Ultimately, it did not really serve them. They did all the right things. He crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, registered things, whatever. Whether or not it really ultimately protected his invention and the profit that would come from it, that doesn't seem to be what happened.
It doesn't happen because there was a Black woman that created the roll top desk, and she doesn't really get the credit for it. She's
No.
not as protected as others are. I mean, they made one little change in it, and she no
Exactly.
longer, it could be one little change, and it would
Exactly.
no longer have anything
No
to
longer
do
be
with
valid.
her.
And
And
that's what
that's yeah, that wasn't fair. But it
no,
was a
that's what
Black
the
woman
industry
that
does.
actually created the roll. Yeah, it was a Black
That's how
woman
they
that
did it.
actually created the roll top desk, and she never got the recognition that she.
What was the
should have
device? The
received
what? The what desk?
The roll top desk. The desk
Oh.
that you know that would you have the thing that would
Like
come
a,
Oh
like
down.
a
yes,
shutter.
Yeah, like a
I need
shutter.
one
It
of
would
those.
close
I
like
need
a
one of those
shutter.
now.
She
Mm-hmm.
it was a Black
Working
woman
late.
that created that.
I did
I'll
not know
send
that.
you
See?
her name. And
Yeah.
I'll send you her name. I told you I have a whole page called Today's
Right.
Defining Black.
But here's the thing. Let's think about that,
Yeah.
y'all. How many? I hadn't even thought about that. A lot of things, even the stuff that white folks filed patents for. Where did that idea actually come from? I'm convinced that I think the story goes a white woman in Philadelphia files the patent for the first ice cream handheld wooden crank device. I'm like, okay, first of all, she's from Philadelphia, which is full of the smartest Black people in history at this time, who are doing all the things in culinary arts, in catering, in ice cream, and confections, not just for in the Black community. They are the people to go to for wealth. Their customers are wealthy white people, the white bankers, because they're the ones to go to for it. And this is a whole different time. Later on, it turns out that we are only left to our customers are only ourselves, which is I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it is very unique in that we spend our money at everybody's, right? But yet we're expected to only in this day and age we must support Black businesses, but we're also expected to keep the economy, support everybody's business. So this is an interesting time now where it's like, no, come back. And everybody needs to support Black businesses, not just Black people. That's crazy. We've been supporting y'all's businesses for forever, but this is a time when that wasn't even the case. So, so my question is, did she really come up with that? Because if she, maybe she did, but my sense is that she might have filed the patent based on the idea of a Black woman or a man who may or may not have had literacy and known how to do that at the time.
Exactly.
So back in James's time, again 1700s, what kind of flavors was he kind of creating in terms of ice cream? And I guess the second part of the question is, what did Thomas Jefferson's friends, because that's basically who would be eating it, what did they make of
it? Those are great questions. Well, the flavor of that time, almost the only game in town. There was some weird esoteric things happening in Europe, but the flavor that was synonymous with ice cream at the time was vanilla. Like that was it. And that's why we get the term, French vanilla today, because that rose to the top as the creme de la creme of ice cream was vanilla. And that's the recipe that James cracks the code on. He has at least 5 recipes, but there's this, he kind of comes up with his own version of this one that Jefferson gets credit to, but it would have been vanilla based on, and one of my colleagues, Sarah Lohman, has a whole story about this in her book, 8 Flavors. And she talks about the story of vanilla coming from one of the African islands. I'm blanking now which one of the East African islands, and the cultivation.
Madagascar, isn't it?
Yes. And there's even like an enslaved person involved in that discovery or that cultivation, and that how to cultivate it and how to use it and how to extract the flavor. Same story supposedly with saffron, which is a similar thing. Vanilla is coming from the parts of the flower, just like saffron, that finds its way into Spain. That also has supposedly a Black African origin as well. I shouldn't say supposedly. I'm pretty sure it does. So the point is, vanilla, to answer your question, would have been the flavor. And there's another man. Do you have another Black guy on your list? named Mr. Jackson. Is he on your
Augustus,
list?
yes.
Augustus Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we get into flavors with him in A Century After James, where he kind of innovates the same way that Black bartenders are using things like mint and berries and things and mixology and muddling. Augustus transfers to ice cream for flavors. You get mint ice cream, and then you get mint chocolate chip, and you get strawberry. You know, a lot of people don't know, Black folks were also strawberry entrepreneurs. You know, think about the strawberry lady, Corgi and Bess. You know, strawberries. You know, like,
hey now. Well, the name of the person that you were talking about, it looks like was Edmund Albius. He was but that supposedly figured out how to extract the vanilla bean, make it grow well. But that's not it. Only reason why I'm kind of hesitant about that is because I don't think that was necessarily during the Thomas Jefferson era.
No.
I'm thinking.
No, it predates and it finds its way into Europe. No, there's so many different parts of this story on the timeline and location. I just connect the dots. No, that is not the same time frame. You're absolutely right. But that's where it starts, and then it finds its way into use, culinary use in Europe, and then it lands. You know, the French, who are like codifying cuisine and deciding these are the sauces, these are this, you know, the best ice cream is made from this vanilla, and this is how you do it, and right, and James is there at that time. That's when he is there. Jefferson takes him to France for the sole purpose of learning these culinary arts, and then James comes back and kind of creates it's the beginning of a uniquely American style of cuisine, which is part French and part Virginian and part French, and the techniques kind of come together. And it's through Jefferson's table, who does a lot of, to your point, Brian, a lot of entertaining, a lot of guests, a lot of dinner parties. James is cooking most of these very famous dinners. He should have been in Hamilton, because that room where it happens, that scene at the dinner where Jefferson invites Hamilton and Madison, and who else was at that dinner? Was it Madison, Hamilton, Jefferson? I think it was just the three of them.
It was just the three of them at that time.
James Hemings cooked that dinner that kind of got them, you know, these guys were not colleagues. They were like they were the equivalent of like Republicans and Democrats today, you know, and they were not seeing eye to eye. But it's, you know, the food becomes the balm, this amazing 5-course meal, which culminated in ice cream, Brian, vanilla ice cream. Yeah, and it kind of helps people to kind of be like, plus, of course, each course was paired with wines, including.
Of course. Of course. You can't.
That might have helped people relax a little.
I wasn't trying to go too far. I mean, I got my ice cream, but I wasn't trying to bring a bottle of wine in here.
Ice cream and champagne on a Sunday afternoon.
I mean, I have to laugh that the story kind of starts with vanilla, because for that time period, I mean, even by today's standards, it's still expensive. But you think back then, obviously, you know, there was no airplanes, and there were no, you know, it was being shipped across oceans from Africa and that part of the world. I mean, it's kind of interesting that they didn't start with things that were more readily available and cheaper, like strawberries or blueberries or mint, you know, things that were kind of growing around them. And if you're going to do something, I mean, I guess if you're going to do it, just get the most expensive thing.
It's starting in royal kitchens. You have to understand, this is not something that started out being for the masses. And that's true. Okay, it starts in like elite special royal kitchens. James is learning from people who are cooking for at the time Marie Antoinette and her husband Louis. And you know, people are like, why didn't James stay in France? I'm like, well, because people were losing their heads, like his clientele, people who would have been his customer. I'm like, there's a lot of complicated reasons why, but the French Revolution had just broken out right before they left. But the point is, he's cooking in the highest level places. So these things were never. It's once over time that it becomes available to the masses, in large part because of the ingenuity and the talent and the creativity and the rolling out of these, like, different family ice cream, Black families making ice cream in their towns, that not just for Black people, but white people were coming to them for this ice cream until they figured out how to not need us for it, through industry or through then Italians come later with their gelato places. That's
and
much later.
And their flavored ices.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to a Black ice cream entrepreneur on the show earlier today, Mikey Nichols of Mikey Likes It Ice Cream, and who's like, whether he knew it or not, he is using a James Hemings recipe, a very simple, organic, organic, all natural, and that vanilla is the base, and that's his ice cream base, and then from that he factors in other flavors to it. But here's the thing, icy treats show up around the world where there's snow. I saw somebody, a listener, type in about snow and stuff, and people figured out ways to bury it in chambers so that it wouldn't melt. And so there's all different types of things and flavors that are happening in Asia and Persia. And it's not just vanilla, but we're talking about this thing that gets codified in the French royal kitchens that comes to America through an talented slave chef who works for the biggest foodie in America, who Jefferson has a residence in Virginia, in Philadelphia, in New York, and he's having dinner parties at all these places, and he is the equivalent of American royalty and what do you call it, celebrity. And James is the person who's making all this amazing stuff that people are getting exposed to. Wow. and then having their cooks, their chefs. Madison, who has a plantation up the road from Jefferson, is like, oh, I want my cooks to, I'll send James over to teach you. Like, James becomes an early culinary instructor for Monticello and for neighboring plantations.
And didn't he work in the White House?
He was asked to work in the White House. He was not asked properly. At this time, he was a free man. He had negotiated his freedom from Jefferson. The simple answer is no, he did not work in the White House. But he did cook for a president who was Jefferson. He cooked in the summers at Monticello. There's a whole story. You have to come to the foodgriot.com and be a patron to get the whole story. I'm kidding. You guys, I'll tell you all the story. We just don't have enough time on the show for me to tell you the whole story. But yeah, he no, it's kind of sad, because even though Jefferson never quite sees him, he still tries to talk to him as if he owns him. And James is like, a reminder, I am a free man. And he wants to be asked the way that he's supposed to be. He's trying to command some respect and normal exchange the way that Jefferson deals with other people, but he just wasn't able to give James that same respect. And and James was like, well, I guess you don't want me in your White House cooking, do you? It was an interesting exchange,
Wow.
And then so Jefferson goes and gets
No, go ahead. Say what you was going to say.
No, so he goes and gets a white French chef to be the first, but who's really doing the cooking? Black women who James had trained at Monticello end up really executing everything. So in face and whatever, there's a white man, French chef, that looks like he's done all the things, but not really, because he comes on late.
Wow. Okay, so we have a couple of questions for you, Tanya, from our guests, our virtual audience. This one is from A.E. Barlow. She says, question for Tanya, how do you prefer to make your ice cream? The contemporary by motorway or old-fashioned by hand?
I prefer to go to artisans who make ice cream using not the grocery store, not the industry, not the conveyor belt.
Girl.
But I'm trying to get to Mikey's. I'm trying to get to Lotus Soup. I'm trying to get to all these contemporary black ice cream makers who are using old style. They're using machines now, But I love how AE assumes I am making ice cream. I aspire to make ice cream. AE, like Tanya, I'm a great cook, if I must say so. I come from a long line of cooks, direct descendant of plantation cooks out of Virginia. But
that's right.
Yeah, but if I were to pick away contemporary by motor or old fashioned by hand, I'm an old school girl, old fashioned, and one might think I would say old fashioned by hand, but only if I or the person actually doing it, which probably wouldn't be me, is skilled at that. Because you can end up with a watery mess. You can end up, if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the right ratios and the right speed and because I've seen it. I'm a food historian. I live across the street from a Dutch stone house built in 1699 that had slaves. I do presentations over there. I work with other food historians. People be showing up with these old contraptions. We're going to make ice cream for today's event. And by the end of the event, we have no ice cream because they missed a step. They did something wrong. So it's too hit or miss with that old school unless you know what you're doing. So I might have to choose a modern version, a modern mechanized one, but using organic ingredients, using only natural, real ingredients, the best cream, imported,
Well, actually, Tanya, you got me thinking. It's the same no matter what you talk about. Because I started a COVID garden, which is still going. Wonderful experience. We know that our ancestors, and again, it's regardless of what they looked like, how they prayed, if they prayed, or any of that stuff. Growing food is not easy. No. And I really have a whole new appreciation for what my ancestors went through to produce food. Because, like I said, it isn't easy. Talking about ice cream, I'm thinking about my great aunt Ella. She's just out in the porch, boom, boom, boom. She's getting us making ice cream. She's making ice cream, and you think it's really easy. But like you said, when you see someone mess up, there's no salvaging it.
I'm not even kidding. There's no salvaging. There's nothing you can do except not have ice cream. And that's what happened at multiple events where some food historian, I'm not going to name any names or any ethnicities, show up talking about, and I'm like, okay, good luck with that.
See, that's like me and my banana pudding. I get mad when my custard ain't right. So, right on the, and that irritates me. But when I get it good, I'm not lying to y'all, I will use a whole dozen of eggs before I get my custard right. If it's not right, I'm throwing it away and I'm starting over again.
Oh, well, see, now, girl, I don't know about that. I would find some use for them. I would find some, because I come from the black school of not
don't throw nothing away.
Thou shalt not waste. Something else shall be made from these.
But I'm gonna say something that there were 6 cousins of mine, and even though we come from that time of thou shalt not waste food, we wasted food. And we used to waste food.
Y'all are newfound. Y'all are Negroes Nouveau, right? Y'all, we can. We heard certain luxuries.
We did.
Accepted,
right? we used to waste food, so we would actually take bacon. You know how when you make your bacon, it had to be pretty, and if you had that ugly bacon, oh my God, we would throw it away. Like, I am not lying to you, we would throw it away.
I just ate some ugly bacon before I signed on. It was ugly and delicious.
We would throw it away, but my custard has to be perfect.
Yeah.
No, my custard has to be perfect for my banana pudding, and I would throw it away. I would toss it.
I thought you make desserts. You make a banana. That's my favorite dessert in the world. We're gonna have to try.
I make banana pudding. I make apple pie, and I make sweet potato pie. One time I posted a picture of, and my sweet potato pie comes from my dad, God rest his soul. But it is literally one of the best sweet potato pies ever, and it is homemade. And I posted a picture of it one time on Facebook, and the Stephanie Mills saw my picture. I don't know why this lady is a friend on my Facebook page, but she is. And she saw it on my page, and she was like, oh, I'm gonna need you to make me
you have a show. You have a show talking about very interesting things that people want to know about, and you cook amazing, like, Blackity black deliciousness. Come on now.
But this was before the show, and she friended me, and I thought it was fake. I didn't know, so I actually have Stephanie Mills on my page, and she looked at my sweet potato pie, and she was like, "That's pie my mother used to make. You have to make that for me." I'm like,
yeah.
When you come, I got you.
Yeah, I was just looking at something that Margot said about not throwing out food. Trust and believe, if you mess up on ice cream, you are left with just a liquid, sugary mess.
Yes. Okay. I mean, you could try to pour it into something and freeze it, and I don't know, make a smoothie with it. I don't know, but like something, yeah, or a milkshake, like, and go back to the way it was before. But I'm fascinated. Okay, I have to ask. I know we don't have time, but the sweet potato pie. There's a whole genealogy in there in terms of like how there's a whole like there are clues. There's an etymology and a genealogy. Like there are clues on recipes in terms of what region of the South or what Black cultural influences. But that's another conversation. What were you going to ask me?
Okay, we're going to talk about that when we close out. Y'all gonna miss that.
So I'm thinking we've kind of spoken about three men: Alfred Cralle, Augustus Jackson, James Hemings. So James Hemings didn't make his fortune out of ice cream. It doesn't sound like Alfred Cralle made a fortune out of his ice cream scoop. Did Augustus Jackson fare any better?
Yes, he made a small or not so small fortune. The question is, and this, I'm literally like thinking of teaming up with Planet Money or Freakonomics or something. This has gotten to the point where I'm not an economist or a financial person, but I really need to understand, and I have a sense of what happened in terms of how capitalism works in America, and how, as the most profitable part of America's capitalism, literally having been enslaved people as property, and then all of the things that they created and generated that were profited by their owners. I believe that played out in these early days, meaning that these Black entrepreneurs were able to amass wealth that, not unlike Black Wall Street or Greenwood or Rosewood, where, during segregation, Philadelphia was a little different. It was segregated, but there was definitely Black parts of town. But again, Black businesses were not relying only on Black customers. Their customers were wealthy white. So these people amassed a lot of wealth. He amassed a lot of wealth. Where is that wealth today? So the same way that these companies become successful and big, and a larger company buys it, right? Like how many Black businesses do we know? Black women invented Black hair care products, but every single large mega Black hair care company today is like, I don't know, I don't even know who they are, but a name, I could say any one of the names that are not Black owned companies. They are, and it's not even so much about selling out. And then we turn on ourselves and like, oh, so and so sold out. It's almost impossible for it not to happen the way capitalism is designed, where it's like the powers that be are like, oh, thank you, I'll take that. And next thing you know, it's traded and owned and profited by it's out of the Black community, something we created over and over and over again. But the wealth and the profit doesn't come back, right? It's literally a you're welcome, and an extraction. It's an extraction. And people were put out of business overnight, practically, once the industrialists, the wealthy white male power structure, they were able to create ice cream on a conveyor belt, and they didn't need, they were out of business after that. And then
that's a good point. That's a good point.
But he generated a lot of money.
I'm going to be devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be the devil's advocate because excuse me, because I had a very successful record label, which I ended up selling. Because again, at that time there weren't that many sizable Black-owned independent record labels and music publishing companies. No one in my family wanted to have it. So I'm like, I literally don't have anyone to pass it on to, so I sold it.
That's an interesting, and that's a reality too, right? You're right. I'm always ready to blame the system and blame capitalism, but it could have been that. But the pattern is so much that because here's where I get suspicious. Thank you for that example. That does balance it out. I need balance, but where I get suspicious is the wealth that was being generated from the caterers and the ice cream makers. They were putting it into the Black community. So the money was coming from wherever, but they were building schools, they were building orphanages, they were funding, soldiers and to fight the Civil War. They were abolitionists. They were part of the Underground Railroad. They founded newspapers with the Black press starts from this money that comes from the caterers and the ice cream vendor makers. I just know the patterns of power in America that gets threatened by Black success, organized Black success, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just wonder, because and then it's also like, I know that there's this thing about generations of Greek diners or generations of different ethnic owned things. I'm like, there should have been a way that these Black businesses, families, artisans, crafts were able to scale up into industry to own early American brands. But that's not, that it was for a system not designed to do that for that ethnic group in particular. It just didn't happen.
Well,
how about they just didn't do it? Yeah, how about they just didn't? How about they just didn't sell back into us like we were doing ourselves? I mean, no. It sounds just really simple to me that they bought our stuff and then they moved and did it and put into somewhere else.
Actually, it sounds like something that Donnie was saying on our show last week about when desegregation happened, when legally it was illegal to do. Black people African Americans weren't supporting other Black-owned businesses.
Yeah, because they thought they made it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is basically exactly what Tanya just said, just really echoed what you said last week.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but what I caution, and I don't know if I have the words, I think that we also have to unlearn this conditioning of taking on all the responsibility. Because why are we the only group expected to support everybody's businesses and be the only ones that support our businesses?
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that. But the thing is
that but everybody else should too.
Everybody else should too. No, I agree. We're the most kind people in the world. We forgive completely. We don't have a problem with saying, okay, I forgive you. Let's start over. Let's do this. We really don't have a problem with any of those things. However, we've also allowed certain things to happen. If I'm if Brian and I decide to have genealogy adventures and it becomes this big thing, and somebody wants to come in outside of the African American race and buy it, I don't think Brian and I would sell it without them doing something that's making it go back into our community. That's where the problem is. That's where the problem is. Nobody made that happen. If I'm going to have an ice cream thing, okay, yes, I have this, but what are you going to do when I sell this to you? Are you going to take it, buy it, and then just take it? Or are you going to buy it, but still put back here? Because, see, that's what I was doing from the beginning. And those are the things that we weren't doing, that wasn't happening.
I don't know if capitalism, the way that we actually practice it, because basically what you're saying is to acknowledge the heritage of what came before that product or that service that was popular and available for sale. I don't think we've ever really had a kind of heritage component. I mean, that would be a really interesting discussion for.
You see it in other culinary cultures. You hear about. I hear about it all the time in the wine families. I'm the 7th generation winemaker, or the Italian pasta makers, or you hear about these things that but not as long as it would have been. All I'm saying, and you're right, after desegregation, that I guess was positioned as a win. The American economy won. The American economy won because they won. They got all of our business. You know, in terms of consumerism. You know, now we're dispersed everywhere, sort of. But our businesses lost big time. Our business is lost because of the dynamic of it. Yes, Black people left. You know, my family moved out of Camden. It was too far to use the local Black grocery store. You can't drive 40 miles every day round trip, or one way round trip to go to the grocery. So when you leave a community physically, geographically, and you're in, and you're in a place that doesn't have Black owned businesses, you're supporting all the other businesses. And then there's the phenomenon of non-Black businesses coming into Black communities owning all the businesses, which is what was happened in LA, the whole LA drama and everywhere else, right? So there's just so many interesting things about business ownership. All I know is historically there were a lot of Black owned businesses that were very talented, that are the precursors of large, massive American industries today, and how somehow we collectively are still the poorest of the people. It's like doesn't add up. My math says we should be the wealthiest group. If it's based on talent and merit and
all of those things. Yeah,
like Black people should be really wealthy in America. I'm just saying.
And that's the last word, because unfortunately we're actually over the hour.
We're over.
So we don't even have time to introduce next week's show. Tanya, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're fine, girl. I'm gonna put it out there, but thank you guys. We hope but don't leave.
Okay. All right.
So thank you guys for joining us. We hope you have enjoyed this show. I'm Tanya.
I'm Brian. We will see you next week at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
All right. See you later. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.